Hi there, and welcome to my presentation from Points to Polygons. My name is Alex Schreyer. I'm at UMass Amherst, and I'll give a little bit background about myself in a second. But what we're going to do in this presentation is that we're going to use point clouds to model in SketchUp. Now, in order to work along, if you want to do that, you can download a sample scan that I have prepared for you at the URL that you see on the right there. You want to look for the process scan, RWP in zip. It comes as a zip file, and you need to unzip it so that you can use it. You also need access to Trimble's Scan Essentials extension that's on the extension warehouse. And you can install that pretty easily from over there if you want to work along. A little bit about myself. My name is Alex Schreyer. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Massachusetts in the Building and Construction Technology program. And I have been working with SketchUp for a while. As you can see, I wrote a book on SketchUp. Now it's in its third edition that you can find, Architectural Design with SketchUp. I also have a website where I post a bunch of tutorials, sketchupfordesign.com, as well as a personal website, alexschreyer.net, where I have my SketchUp extensions. I have created a bunch of them, and you can find them there, or you can find them on the extension warehouse, and download those and use them for free. Then, of course, I do have a YouTube channel where I post a bunch of my videos, and I encourage you, of course, to head over there, check them out, and follow me on that channel as well. Okay. So what we want to do today is I want to give you a bit of an introduction first into scanning, as you can see here. And then we're going to talk about tools, both from the physical side, the scanners, as well as the software side, the extensions and whatever software you're going to need to process those scans, all the way up to using them in SketchUp. And then I want to show you as a hands-on exercise two things. One is the processing, RealWorks, and iPad works up to a point as well. And then the SketchUp modeling, where we use Scan Essentials and model basically right off a point cloud. Intro to scanning. This view is a scan of the Over Design building, atrium, at the University of Massachusetts. It's a mass timber building that we have been in ever since 2017. It's also the housing the first ever Trimble Technology Lab, and we're very happy about being able to, use Trimble's tools for our research and our education, of course. Now, what's the point of laser scanning? Well, there is a need, of course, and the need is the tape measure. We need to measure existing conditions one way or another. And this could be, of course, a site. This could be an existing building. We might be doing a renovation, an outfit, or retrofitting, or any of those things. Anyways, the traditional way is, of course, send the intern out with a tape measure and a notepad, and hope that all the data that you need to model this in your design software comes back. And then, of course, invariably, you would have forgotten something, and you would have to go back out, and you have to measure again. And all along, you're assuming that a wall is vertical. What if it isn't? What if there's something that's not straight? How do you measure that with these tools? Then, of course, we do have advanced tools. We do have total stations, like the one shown on the right there, where we can measure any point very accurately. And that is, of course, great, but it's still point by point. And one use case for a laser scanner is, of course, that you send somebody out with a laser scanner, scan a certain space, and then all of that data comes back. All of these points come back, measured, ready to use, even if you don't need them, at least not right away. You don't have to send anybody out with a total station again to measure a few points that were missed. So whether it's a renovation project, whether it's a new construction project, there's a really good argument for getting a laser scan done and working off that. as opposed to some of these other techniques. Applications, like I said, could be any kind of as-built documentation, or it could be outfitting an existing building where you have to build onto or add something else. Landforms and anything that's not rectilinear is best measured this way because you can document that much better than any other way. And then, of course, any kind of shape, sculptures, any architectural shape that is not rectilinear is so much easier measured with a laser scanner. All right, so what are the tools? When it comes to tools, there's, of course, hardware. And in terms of hardware, we have a bunch of options. There are laser scanners that Trimble and other manufacturers sell. They come in different quality ranges, different price categories. Often has to do with precision, and you can imagine, the way that this works is it shoots out a laser from a central location, measures the return distance, or the return time, and calculates the distance based on that. And so at that point, you have this angular precision that is very much dependent on your optics and on the precision that this tool can deliver. And so then, of course, higher precision tools will have a smaller error over a certain distance than other tools. So that's usually what you want to look for there. Then, of course, you're measuring distances, but you can also record color, and you can record your environment in a somewhat photorealistic way at that point, which often helps with identifying things. Once you work with a laser scanner or a point cloud, as you can see later, things can get a little hard to identify, and of course, if you have the color information, that helps. We do have these tools in consumer products too, to some extent, or prosumer in this case. iPads, iPad Pros, and other devices are LiDAR enabled. They do have a setup where it basically puts a grid of light over your field of vision, and then measures based on that, and is actually reasonably precise. So for interiors, for smaller models, all of those things, that could be a tool of choice. And then you can bring those scans into SketchUp, and of course the iPad version of SketchUp has that built in at this point too. Then there are drones, and you can use photogrammetry, whether you use photogrammetry using drones or terrestrial by just taking photographs, is depends on the project obviously, but that is another way to do it, where you fly around something, take a lot of photos, and then process the surface of that building or whatever into a mesh or a point cloud, and then work off that. That could also be anchored back to GPS coordinates and made reasonably precise that way. And for larger projects, that is very likely a tool of choice. Now, when it comes to software, there are a few options, especially now in our SketchUp world. One is you can always import any XYZ data as construction points. This is rather inefficient because SketchUp doesn't process those overly well, because it always tries to attach geometry to other geometry, and so then these construction points can become quite cumbersome very quickly. But for anything that only has a few XYZ points that you may want to work with, that may actually not be a bad way to go. Then you can always import a mesh into SketchUp, like the photogrammetry mesh, for example. There's a bunch of 3D file formats available in SketchUp Pro where you can then import that and work off it, whether it has material data attached to it or whether it's really just a mesh. Depends on the file format and your raw material, raw data, basically. Then when it comes to point clouds, Scan Essentials is an extension that's available now, and it works really well, and I'll show you that in a second. That comes, as far as I understand it, with the subscription for SketchUp Pro, and you may want to double check whether it's already part of your subscription, but one caveat there is that it only works in Windows. Another extension that's out there is the Undead extension. I never know how to pronounce it, but it's a great one for working with point clouds. It has a bunch of processing and classification tools, and I very much encourage you to take a look at it. I'm not going to be working with it today in this presentation, but it's out there and you'll find it in the extension warehouse. If you're bringing points in and if you're bringing meshes in, there's another extension of note. That's the skimp extension, where you can reduce the number of points based on your needs and your computer's capacity. So that might be a really useful way to reduce points and meshes to a usable size. All right, so that's the software side. What I want to show you now is the processing. So this would be software side before you get to SketchUp, basically. And it very much depends on what your setup is. If you have a laser scanner and you process these yourselves, then this would be your workflow. But many people don't, and you may actually, for a project, hire somebody to create a scan for you. So then, based on what you'll see in a second, you can decide on which kind of classifications you may want to ask from them, and what kind of point cloud densities you may want to have delivered, and so those would be then more your requirements than something you produce. But after this, we're going to be looking at working with Scan Essentials and SketchUp, and we'll jump into that. So first of all, RealWorks, scan registration and classification. Okay, let's take a look at RealWorks, Trimble RealWorks, which is the processing software for Trimble scanners. And if you are using a different scanner, then of course you may have a different processing software, but you can also open any kind of a file with this software. So this is a very powerful software, and I am just skimming the surface right here, right now. And but what I want to show you is that you can take a scan from a scanner, and in my case it's one with 2 stations, and then register it in here, and then classify it, and then prepare it so that you can open it in SketchUp and then work with it and model right in SketchUp, basically. Okay, let's open a file. If I go to my folder here, I have an unprocessed file that is a project, came straight from the scanner. It looks like this, basically. There's a process file, a project file, and a project folder, and I'm going to open those. And once I have that, then I can see in here, this is already partly processed, that I have my 2 stations, station 1, station 2, and those need to be stitched together, similar to when you are stitching panoramic photos together. It'll try to find common points, common areas, and match them as good as it can, and actually gets it pretty well matched, as long as it's indoors. Outdoors, where you don't have as many similar planes that it can find automatically, it gets a little harder, and you may actually have to do some manual correction. And this is where this software here is really useful. But again, you may not be the one doing all of this. You may actually be just consuming a point cloud that somebody else produced for you. But I want to show you just really quickly the process in RealWorks right here. Okay, so the first thing we got to do is we got to be in registration mode. There's 2, registration and production. And then if I go over to registration, you see here there's a whole lot of tools that you can use. I'm going to use the auto register using planes tool, and we're going to just ignore this little error. And then it comes up like this here. And you can see we have both our stations in there. We get a little preview of those, and it will look for planes in this model and then match those 2. So this, of course, can be quite an involved process if you have a lot of stations, and you may want to do this in parts. But nevertheless, this is how it works, and I'm going to just show it to you with 2 stations. You always want to generate a preview scan, and then I'm going to click on Start and let it crank away. And then you can see the progress down here on the bottom within a few seconds, hopefully, or a minute, if it takes a while. You will get this finished, and then once it's done, we have our auto-registered model right here, or basically point cloud right here. And then on the right, you can see how well we did. So typically there will be some kind of an error, because there's an error with everything. And you can read it out right here. I have, less than 2 millimeters error. I'm okay with that right now. My point cloud consists of preview point cloud. So, for production, you may need something different. But in any case, I'm happy with what I got now. I'm just going to close it. And then in here, you're going to be able to see your point cloud. And you can preview it right here. There's a bunch of viewing tools just to the left here, as in, thickness of points and how it gets rendered and so on and so forth. We'll encounter this same set of tools in SketchUp. And so for now, actually, we don't really have to do anything right here. But you'll see my preview. You'll see the 2 stations right in there. And I could actually now refine a point cloud right in here. For example, there's a bunch of ghost points that came in through reflections, and a clean point cloud, you would want to remove those. So anyways, so that's the registration part in a very, very small nutshell. And then if I go over to production, I can work with this point cloud now. And I have it right here. And you see down there that there's one main point cloud. I can turn it on and I see my cloud right here. That's everything. And I do get the number of points right there. Nice big number as always. But anyways, that's just the plain point cloud. At this point, what you may want to do is you may want to classify this cloud. And it, again, depends on what it is you're doing. If you're doing indoors, there's an indoor auto classify tool. If you're doing outdoors, there's an outdoor tool. Let me show you the outdoor options first, which of course don't apply here, but you can see that you can then auto classify the ground, building, all of these things, which is great because then later on you can, filter these in or out of your model as needed. I'm going to do the indoor classification right here. And then you can automatically extract floor, graded floor, which I don't have, so I'm going to uncheck that. Ceiling, walls, and remaining. Remaining is often the furniture, maybe some people that are walking through, that sort of stuff. And this way I can, process my entire point cloud automatically into smaller point clouds that I can then recall when I'm working with this in SketchUp. Again, this is going to crank away. You'll see it down here. And once it's done, you'll see under my point cloud on the left here, all of these various subclouds. And here we are. Okay, so now you see there's still my main point cloud. But now that one's turned off, or you can turn things on and off like this here. And I can turn, for example, the ceiling off. I can turn the walls off. I can turn remaining off. Oops. And I'm left with the floor. If that's all I wanted to work with, then that's a great way to recall things. And you see here, of course, that there's different numbers of points that belong to each one of these, and they're all classified now. But you always still have the main point cloud as well that you can work with. All right, so then you would just file, save this either as a RealWorks file, or you export it as a file that works in any kind of point cloud software. There's a few file formats for that. But yeah, that's the processing in a nutshell. And again, as you can see up here, there's all kinds of other tools. You can actually within here, draw as well and export geometry. But we're going to use SketchUp for that, so we don't really need to do that right here. Next, we're going to do SketchUp modeling. For this, we're going to be working with the Scan Essentials extension in SketchUp, and we're going to be using my sample scan, which you can download using the information there on the right, and you can practice this yourself. Alrighty, so in order to get working with any kind of a point cloud, of course, you have to have two things. One is a point cloud, and the other one is the Scan Essentials extension. So the Scan Essentials extension can be found in the warehouse right here, extension warehouse, look for Scan Essentials. There's one big caveat, it's right here. This one only works on Windows, and I believe it's included in the subscriptions, but don't quote me on that. Check the Trimble website for that. But basically, get that, download it, install it, and you've got one thing done. Once you install it, you're going to get this toolbar right here, Trimble Scan Essentials. And that has all the tools that we're going to need. We're going to look at those in a section. We're going to basically open a file and work with it, and I'll show you what all of these buttons do. Now, the second thing you're going to need is, of course, a point cloud file. And if you don't have one, there is a file for you on my website. If you go to SketchUp4Design.com, and then you look under SketchUp book, chapter 3, because it's part of chapter 3 in that book. And if you scroll a little bit down, you're going to, where are we here? There we are. Get to the section that says download files. And there are a few point clouds available for you, depending on what you want to do. The best one to work with, without anything else, as long as you have Scan Essentials, is the third one here, Process Scan. That one you can download as a zip file. You have to unzip it into a local location, otherwise it won't open. But once it's unzipped, then you can open this right with Scan Essentials in SketchUp. If you happen to want to experiment with processing a scan in RealWorks, for example, then you may want to download the second one here where it says Unprocessed Scan. And if you don't have Scan Essentials, if you don't have RealWorks, then you can still do something. This first one here is basically a bunch of points that are imported as construction points into SketchUp, and you can use the web version, you can use any version of SketchUp to experiment with this a little bit. This is not the same user interface as the other two, obviously, but it gets you going. So this is the first one, SketchUp Point Cloud. But like I said, this third one here is the one that you want for our exercises right here. And then once you have that, you're good to go. Okay, we're ready to load a point cloud file now. I'm going to click the File Open button on the Scan Essentials toolbar. This is not the SketchUp File Open, so that's an important difference. But from here, I can now browse to some point cloud data. I have a RealWorks file in on my hard drive right here. So there's a project file and a project folder. Ignore what's in the middle here. Those two belong together. Depending on where you get your point clouds from, you may have them come in other file formats. And as you can see here on the right, there are other file formats that you can load into this. But I'm going to work with a RealWorks file, and I'm just going to open that. Now that usually takes a little bit, and then you see the ghostly points appear right there. And once you see something, you know you're good. Okay, let's look at kind of the my main tool, the Point Cloud Manager here. What's interesting about this Point Cloud Manager is a bunch of the tools that you see in here are actually replicated as toolbar buttons there, so you don't always have to have this open. Once you become more comfortable with this, you might as well just use your these buttons, but I'm going to keep it open because a few things are a little easier to see here. Okay, so let's take a look at the Point Cloud Manager, and I'm going to walk you through a bunch of these features. So first of all, up here you have the point cloud reference. You have options to change, load, unload, all of those kind of things. Next, what's interesting is adjusting the display. As you can see right here, they come in with a default opacity, and you can fade this in and out. This is also replicated up there where I have these little buttons right here from 0 to 100%. And as you work with this, you will find that you will want to hide things, make things visible, change opacity as you go along. And so there's a real big need to be able to adjust this as you go. The other thing that's useful is this point size, and you'll see it when I kind of zoom in a little bit. You see here at some point these become very thin, and I can make them thicker using this slider. I usually like to work with a little bit heavier thickness, just so that I see what's going on. But sometimes when you have a lot of points, of course, that gets very messy. So again, another one of those things that you may want to change while you work on this. The next one, density, you can kind of see a little bit. Actually, I'm going to move my size down. You can see here that stuff fades out while I move around. This is really important for large point clouds. Mine is a preview point cloud, so it doesn't have as many points as it could have. But you see when I change density, of course, I retain many of those points. So again, adjust to your liking. I'm going to make point size back to my middle here. Then you can colorize these, and there are a bunch of different ways you can color these. One is true color. My scanner does not have true color, so you can't see that. This would be a photorealistic sort of representation if that worked. You can do by intensity. This means, of course, if I have more points in an area, I see more intensity, like here and here. Can be useful. Station color is useful because you often have multiple stations. I have 2 in my model, and you may want to be able to identify which point belongs to which station. And then there's white in there. White doesn't work very well as it is here, but I'll show you in a second where it's useful. You can color by height. Not overly useful in my case right here. And then you can do grayscale. Let me show you with white. One thing that happens with shading over here, you have your default shading, of course, but you can also turn on shading that's a normal shading, where you get a little bit more surfacey type appearance. With a default, you won't get that, even if you have, like these guys here. So if you do white and normal shading, that's usually quite useful, but there's other options here too. You see, of course, this ambient and that guy. All right, so I'm going to just leave it like this here. And then, as you can see here, of course, I am on the outside of my building, and so I can't easily look inside. There are these cloud view options here. You can click this view inside, which basically hides the points that are obstructing your view, as you can see right here. And again, this is really useful as you're working with this, because all of a sudden you can look inside and you can work with the points that you see in there. There's another feature here which highlights edges, which is really great. This is one that you could use, for example, if I go here in top view and switch to parallel. I seem to be, no, I'm not. Now I'm in parallel projection. You can use something like this very easily, to identify lines and do floor plans, outlines, and the like. So again, depending on your workflow and depending on what you need, switch all of those back and forth as you like. Okay, let me turn everything on again. So that I can show you the next feature here. Clipping box I'm going to skip for now. I'll show you that later, where we're going to start modeling, and we're going to basically reduce all of this to a smaller set of points so that we can work on a section of this. Under clouds over here, you see that my cloud has been categorized in a bunch of different, or classified in a bunch of different categories, where there's a main cloud, which is everything. And I can turn this off and nothing changes because I still have these subclouds that, you know, make up this whole thing. But within RealWorks, I was able to, classify these automatically, which is a really great feature. This works for indoors as well as for outdoors. So for outdoors, this would be ground, this would be low vegetation, this would be tall vegetation, and so on. Utility lines and buildings and so on and so forth. But for indoors, this is what we get. So ceiling, floor, remaining, which is furniture typically, and walls. But as you can see when I turn this off, if I turn off everything but floor and walls, for example, I get, you know, a much easier way to work with this. And if I only want to work with the floor, for example, I can do this now, and I have myself the floor. Now it gets a little interesting when you have ramps and steps and so on, because at that point the algorithm doesn't really identify everything as floor there. But this is usually very useful to start modeling. So if you make your own point clouds, if you have the capability to do that, of course you want to look for this classification option. But if you get somebody to produce a point cloud for you, then of course you may want to mention this so that they can prepare the point cloud so that it's much easier for you to work with it. All right, so let me turn all of those back on again, and we've got this here. Then, as you may have seen here in my scan, actually, wait, let's look inside again. There are only two stations that I have. There was one here, and then there was one over here, the two circles, basically. I only did a preview scan for this, so this would not be a real production scan, but it's enough points for us to work with. Anyways, you see down here, those are shown too, and I actually can turn on and off the points that belong to each of those stations. Can be useful, again, to limit view or to enable view, or all of those. All right, so then if you go further down here, there's a bit about sections where you can use SketchUp sections. This is something we can cover later a little bit. Inspection is a tool to verify how good your modeling is as compared to the point cloud. So also something that we're going to work with later. And then you can transform your point cloud. This would typically be your first step. I did it not as my first step right now, but just in terms of what's happening. If you look at my origin in SketchUp right here, you can see roughly what happened, which is that the point cloud comes in with the origin with its origin being the eye height of the first station. This was my first station right here, placed at the origin in SketchUp. This may or may not be useful, and you can, at this point here, fix it. So you can basically see the transformation down here. We don't have any transformation, but then I can go up there to my toolbar, and I can move a point cloud like this, or I can rotate a point cloud using SketchUp's usual tools. So this is very nicely implemented, very easy to use, and then once you have it placed, as you can see here, now I've got my transformation mentioned here, and I can of course always reset it if I need it and get back to where I was. All right, so there's that, and then there's a few settings done here. But in principle, that's what's in the Point Cloud Manager, and that's typically how you start, setting up your work and your workflow with point clouds in SketchUp. And just to quickly walk you through the toolbar, I've looked at a few things already. So the first buttons allow you to load a point cloud, to unload a point cloud. Then all of these here are basically this, visibility part, because once you start modeling SketchUp entities, you do need to see things. Then next to that, you've got the snapping tool, and we'll use that quite extensively, but you can snap to SketchUp, or you can snap to a point cloud, which is really important once you, have something and you may have to, reach behind the point cloud to snap onto something in SketchUp. In terms of drawing tools, there's a construction point tool and a guideline tool. Those are, of course, not necessarily in SketchUp's tool set, so that's why they're here. But you can use SketchUp's tool set as you know it, or you can use all of this here. Next is this section here about clipping boxes, and I'll show you that in a second, what you do with that. Then we talked about moving and rotating a point cloud a second ago, and then the last few are a great feature to actually make a ground mesh from a point cloud automatically, which is creating terrain, and I'll show you that as well. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview of the point cloud manager and the toolbar for Scan Essentials. Okay, let's get started on working with this point cloud here. I want to look at a column that's over here, right there in the middle, and start modeling that one. And in order to do that, of course, I have all of these points to contend with. Now that's way too much, so we're going to limit our view. Up here there are a few tools to create a clipping box. So you can create a clipping box from a selection. I'll show you that in a second. Or you can create a clipping box from the entire point cloud, and then you can work with the current SketchUp selection or deactivate clipping boxes. So those are really useful to limit your scope here. I'm going to start with entire point cloud first, which is huge because my point cloud has a lot of reflections, so there's a lot of ghost points that haven't been filtered out. But when you click on that, you get this bounding box, and you can use SketchUp's scale tools to limit your view. It's very easy to use, of course, because we all know our scale tool. And then you can, find your way in there. And I can now go ahead and, click this all the way to limit my view. And then, of course, if I unselect, I still have this bounding box right here. And then if I go to the point cloud manager and I go a little further down, you see here the clipping box is now listed as one of my options. And I can always go back here and check it and then activate it. Now I can deactivate my clipping box right now, like this here, and show you another tool. Another tool uses this first option here from the cloud selection. Now the cloud selection is perpendicular to your view. So if I'm in any kind of an angled view, I'm going to get an angled cloud selection, which may or may not be useful. But for this, I actually want to go into top view. So I'm going to use my shortcut to go to top view, and I'm going to go into parallel projection because life's a little easier that way, because now I can very easily see what I want to do here. And I can now go ahead and click this first icon, and I can just draw a little selection around that, and I'm done right here. So now you can again go into the point cloud manager. I have my point cloud right here. I'm going to make my points a little bigger now so that we can see this a little better and actually show all the points. And now this is something I can work with. And actually, if I may not need everything that's up here, so I'm going to go back into my scale tool and just make this shorter. And I've got something selected from my big point cloud that I can work with. So that's what these clipping boxes do. And again, you can get out of that, but you now have them in your list here, so you can always go back in and work on things this way. This is really useful for limiting your view. And then, of course, you can combine this, if need be, with your cloud selection if you have any kind of classification. So, for example, here, if I turn everything but the floor off, then I still only get the floor remaining, and for that I get the walls right there. So that may be needed or useful as well. let's take a look at some modeling strategies in SketchUp with point clouds. And you can see here I've got a section of my point cloud with this column with a circular object, a garbage can technically, and the floor. And I'm going to use those as examples for modeling. And of course, you know, depending on your case, you may need to extrapolate some of these techniques, or go back and forth between some techniques, because very often it's not just one technique that does it all. Okay, let's take a look first at drawing on the model. You can draw right on the model by simply using any of the SketchUp tools right here, and then you can just click on the model. The very important bit here is enshrined in these three toolbar buttons on the Scan Essentials toolbar, where you basically can choose between picking a point cloud point or a SketchUp entity. And if you have SketchUp entity, then of course it'll look behind there and just draw in the SketchUp space. And then of course point cloud is when you draw on your point cloud. And now what I want to do is, of course, start drawing on the point cloud, and I can just do it like this here. So you can use a rectangle tool, you can use line tool or whatever. This does not always work. So let me just quickly show you what happens here on the ground. I can't draw a good rectangle. I can actually draw it a little off to the side. That would work. So another strategy for this is to actually draw something in SketchUp space. And I'm just going to simply draw a rectangle somewhere. And because my point cloud is below ground right here, I'm drawing it right here. And then afterwards, you'd simply move your SketchUp objects, and I'm making sure that I'm picking SketchUp right here, into or onto the point cloud. So now I'm gonna switch to point cloud pick, and by doing that, I can place my rectangle right there. So the modeling strategy here is, of course, well, you're reasonably certain that something is a horizontal plane, so then you can approach it this way. Or you are, just kind of re-engineering to some extent what it is you have. If you have standard dimensions, you draw something that's close to that standard dimension, you bring it in and see if it fits, and if it fits, then it's very likely that standard dimension. So that's one way to work with this. And now I've got my ground drawn right here. Okay, just going to delete this so that it gets a little clearer what I have right there. Now, up here I already drew a rectangle on the side right there, and you can see that it picked the points pretty well. Now, with these points, there's always a little bit of error. So a rectangle may not be perfectly vertical in this case, but it may actually be pretty close. So this is often a bit of a trial and error process where you then find out what works and what doesn't work. Also on this side here, I have a few points that are above the point cloud because there's a decal right there, and so if I accidentally click that, my rectangle would not be vertical at all. Okay, so let's assume I have drawn this reasonably well on that side. Then of course you can go ahead and again, use your SketchUp tools. And I'm picking the point cloud, yeah, so that's good. And use your SketchUp modeling skills to draw this. And then you can do something like this here, where you basically do a push-pull approach. I'm going to pull this all the way down there, and I'm just going to ignore the top. Oh, well, I can go all the way to there at least. And you have something created. Now, would be nice if there were a way to verify what you've drawn is accurate. And there is actually a way. If you go to the Point Cloud Manager right here, and you scroll all the way down to where it says Inspection, you do have this inspection map. And an inspection map is a visual representation whether your points are close to geometry. And you can set, of course, a certain distance depending on what it is you want to set as your tolerance, maybe 20 millimeters. And then you can see what's going on. What I found is really important is to align my view with the surface, because otherwise the color matching isn't perfect. It changes a little bit when you move around, but this gives me something to work with. And then again, I can look around and I can see maybe up here I didn't hit the points overly well. So that's one way to inspect how well you actually did the modeling and whether you're good. All right, so that's one way to model. Another way is to use basically predefined shapes. What I did with that rectangle earlier, I can do with shapes too. So you could, for example, use my place shapes extension, or you could just model, standard shapes, like a box, for example, on the side, and then move those into position as you're modeling. So for example, what I might want to do right now with this circular bit here with a garbage can is I might want to go into top view. And I think I was in parallel projection already, so that's all good. And now, actually, I'm going to do a little experimenting here too. I'm going to, we just changed the view here to an outline. So basically cloud views, I'm doing outline as opposed to everything, although in this case, it doesn't matter that much. And I picked one of these here and reset shading basically. So now I've got my points here, and now I can start by placing something that's already a cylindrical shape in the middle here. I try to get it as good as I can. I then go ahead and scale it. And afterwards, oops, I gotta get my point cloud back. Afterwards, move it and finish it. So that's another way to work here. Where, no, I really messed it up. Let's move this down. There you go. Where now we can work with a known object and start fitting it in there. So one tool that I'm that I know RealWorks, for example, has, and some other processing software, is fitting tubular shapes and rectangular shapes into point clouds. That would be really nice if it were here. So I'm looking forward to that if that ever were to come. But other than that, we can always use this approach. And then, of course, same as what we did before, we can go into our inspection map, turn it on, and verify how good or bad we modeled. Right there. So those are some techniques that you can use to create geometry based on your point cloud. And of course, you will have to very likely always, actually, let's go back and just turn our clipping box off. Always go, back out, back in, have different clipping views, and then work on sections, and then, of course, work on the whole as a final step, so that you get to your 3D model. One thing that I haven't shown, actually, let me get back into my little clipping box just because things are a little easier to see, are these two tools, Construction Point and Guideline. Those are really useful if you basically want to measure out of your point cloud and then rather model later. So if I do a construction point, make sure I snap onto my point cloud, I can just, wherever I need to, place these. It'll snap onto the point cloud and I get my construction point. If I get, if I want a temporary line, then of course I can just draw that too. And then again, if I hide my point cloud, I'm left with these points and temporary lines or construction lines that I can then model onto. So that's yet another way how you can work with a point cloud and in your modeling process. Okay, so I hope this gave you a few options to create something with a point cloud. I'm going to show you the Create Ground Mesh tool in a second too. Okay, let's take a look at the Create Ground Mesh tool in Trimble Scan Essentials. And for that, I needed a model that has some ground in it, basically an outdoor scan of a bioswale right here. Let's quickly explore this point cloud in the point cloud manager. And similar as before, I want to pick a point size that I can work with. I want to pick a shading that works for me. I use this one for now, since we're outdoors. It's pretty good. And then this cloud has all of these classifications, which is really useful because I can now just pick and choose what I want. So I can turn the main cloud off, and actually I'm going to hide all and just turn on what I want to see. So as you can see here, there's the various buildings that are, let me just get them all in here like this. And then you can see already there's the ground. It's ultimately what I want to work with. And then there's high vegetation, trees, poles and signs. I don't think there's one here, but then there's a whole lot of remaining, so that sort of stuff. So that's a really great tool. And again, this happens in the processing software RealWorks in my case, but you may have a different one. Anyways, so I'm just going to turn the ground on because ultimately I want to basically create a ground mesh for what I have here. And now in here, I can, of course, limit my view using a clipping box right there, and I could make this much smaller that way, or I can go into top view, parallel projection, and then create a clipping box just from my selection, and I'm going to do this bit. There you go. So, depending on what it is you need, of course, adjust for your purpose. Okay, so here's my ground mesh, and I'm going to fire up the first of the Create Ground Mesh tools right here, and you can see there's three options. One is Fit Cloud, one is rectangular, and one is bounded right here, but I want to fit the cloud because ultimately, just the data that I have basically. And then you got to start with a cell size, and it makes sense to start with a larger one to begin with because you can always refine later. I'm going to say, because mine is not too big, I don't know, 2 feet just for now. It might be a little large, but anyways, so we can do that. And then of course you can use known ground data, or just create mesh, and you may want to experiment with the various options, and I'm just going to say create mesh and cancel out of this, and then you can see what I got. So basically have this mesh fitted to my point cloud, and if I turn the visibility of the point cloud off, you can see that I have a really nice terrain now. So this is of course accurate. Most of this looks great, has a nice gradient on the landscape, but there are some sections, especially this one right here, where I want to have a little bit more detail, where I have a catch basin, for example. So I'm going to turn on my point cloud so that I can see what I'm doing. You can kind of see it here, how that fits in there. And then I can experiment with the second tool. This one's called Add Detail. And in order to use that, I have to get into the point cloud, into the ground mesh, and you can just do that like any other SketchUp tool. You just double click it and you're in there. And then you're gonna need to highlight what you want to refine, and then you're gonna click the Add Detail button to add detail. And what happens is, of course, as you can see here, that all of these triangles get halved in size, and new data gets queried from the point cloud, and then this becomes much more precise when I have this drop-off. This is still a drop-off right here that's not caught very well, but that's okay. I can fix that later. But now I at least have a little bit more detail right there. And then turning off my point cloud, I can see now my terrain that I've created with this tool right here. There's another option that is really useful. You can thicken this. You can make solid. So select, make solid, and you get yourself a thickness to it. This is useful for creating for 3D printing it for one, or for creating sliced terrain slivers for let's say laser cutting and terrain modeling or the like. So those are all the tools that come with this ground mesh creation tool right here. Thank you for listening to this. You can find me at sketchupfordesign.com and my other websites, and of course the YouTube channel at any point. And I hope this was useful for you.